Hello again, my name is William Pye, and this video will be talking about connectives. In the last video, we talked about statements, essentially a declarative sentence, a statement that can be either true or false. What we want to do here is use statements as essentially the building blocks to build more complex statements, to essentially relate statements to one another using what are called connectives, and that is what we want to start with here. So with the notion of a statement, how can one relate statements to one another? Moreover, how can statements be strung together to create an argument? Consequently, the next topic of consideration is going to be the sentential connective, which are going to link statements to one another. Tying this back to grammar the same way we did before, the words that we're going to need to make this work are going to be the following: conjunctions and adverbs. Consequently, much like before, we're going to start off with the grammatical terms and move into their consideration in logic. Now, the links between sentences are going to be conjunctions. To be precise, the definition here is going to be a conjunction is a word that serves to join words or groups of words. Specifically, we're going to use them to join statements or clauses together. Now, there are two types of conjunctions that are going to be considered. You have coordinate conjunctions and subordinate conjunctions. Coordinate conjunctions join statements that are on the same level, basically of the same type. To be precise, a coordinate conjunction joins words, phrases, or clauses of equal rank. For instance, the ground shook and the sky darkened. The ground shook is an independent clause, the sky darkened is also an independent clause, and the word and is joining them together since they're both independent clauses. They essentially are on the same level with each other. Same thing with this one, which is he drank a cola or she drank tea. He drank a cola is an independent clause. She drank tea is also an independent clause. The word or is joining those two independent clauses together in this same sentence. Subordinate conjunctions, on the other hand, join statements that are on different levels. To be precise, a subordinate conjunction makes a clause subordinate to the main idea in the sentence. So for instance, the sky darkened when the storm arrived. The main thrust here is that the sky darkened. The when the storm arrived, however, is describing when the sky darkened. It's giving temporal information about the sky darkening, as well as possibly a cause, the storm rolling in causing the sky to darken. The car accelerates if the pedal is depressed. Well, the car accelerating is the main idea here. If the pedal is depressed is stating a condition under which the car is accelerating. So it's describing why the car accelerates or how the car accelerates. Lastly, we can shop after we visit the bank. Well, we can shop is the main idea of this sentence. After we visit the bank, on the other hand, is stating when we can shop and possibly where we need to get the money that's needed to do the shopping in the first place. Consequently, the after is stating when the shopping will occur. Also, some words will be necessary to modify or specify the extent of a statement. These are what we call adverbs. An adverb is a word that is added to a verb, or adjectives, or even other adverbs, to modify or expand the meaning of the verb. So, for instance, the boys only ran. The word only is stating the extent to which these boys are taking action. Specifically, these boys are running, but they're not taking any other action. The boys only ran. The ship then landed. Well, the ship landed, but they landed at a particular moment in time. The ship landed then, at this moment. Lastly, the plane will not fly. Well, one would like to think that an airplane is capable of flight. However, this airplane, for whatever reason, is no longer capable of flight. Thus, the not is negating the statement, stating that the original statement of the plane will fly is false, essentially changing its meaning to no longer being capable of flight. With the grammatical ideas in hand, how are they used in logic? Well, in logic, statements are linked with connectives, yielding molecular sentences from the atomic simple sentences that we saw before. Specifically, a sentential connective, or simply just connective, is a word or words that connect sentences. These are going to be our conjunctions and our adverbs and the parts of speech that we talked about before. Consequently, a molecular sentence is one or more atomic sentences that are put together with one of these connecting words, one of these connectives. The first connective that we're going to talk about is actually unary, affecting only one statement. This is what's known as the negation. The negation of a sentence denies the truth of the sentence by asserting it is not the case that, whatever the original statement was. The negation, as you might imagine, of a true statement is false, and the negation of a false statement is true. It literally flips the truth value from true to false and from false back to true. So specifically, here's an example. The negation of the statement, the plane will fly, would be explicitly this statement. It is not the case that the plane will fly. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, so usually we simplify this down to being the plane will not fly, giving us the example that we had a little while ago. The other connectives are binary, fusing two statements into a single statement, the first of which is the conjunction. The conjunction of two sentences uses the word and to create a single sentence. Each of these two sentences in the conjunction will be called a conjunct, so the operands of this operation are the conjuncts of this operation. And the conjunction of two sentences is true if and only if both sentences are true. That is, the conjunction's true if both of the other guys are true at the same time. Now, I want to throw out a word of warning here. I've now used the word conjunction in two ways. You have a conjunction in grammar, and you have a conjunction in logic, and they are different. One's more general than the other one. A grammatical conjunction is a word or words that puts clauses together or phrases together. On the other hand, you have a logical conjunction which specifically puts together two statements, two sentences, two declarative sentences with the word and in between them. So, in which case, a logical conjunction is a grammatical conjunction, but not the other way around. It's kind of like a square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. So please be a little bit aware of this and don't confuse the two notions with each other. So for an example, the conjunction of the ground shook and the other statement is the sky darkened. If I want to conjunction these two, I would get the ground shook and the sky darkened. Literally just take the two statements and put and in between them. The next connective is the disjunction. The disjunction of two sentences uses the word or to make a single sentence. So you're using the grammatical conjunction or to create the logical disjunction. Each of the two sentences in the disjunction is a disjunct, and the disjunction of two sentences is true if and only if at least one of the two sentences happens to be true. So for instance, the disjunction of he drank a cola and the second statement she drank tea would be he drank a cola or she drank tea. Again, the two statements with the word or sandwiched between them. The next connective is the implication or the conditional. The implication uses the words if, then to obtain a single sentence from two separate sentences. So the sentence immediately following the if is the antecedent or the hypothesis of the implication. The sentence immediately following the then is the consequent or conclusion of the implication. Now, an implication is false if the antecedent is true and the consequence is false. Otherwise, the implication is true. So we've had an example of this before, and that is, if the pedal is depressed, the car accelerates. So the antecedent here is the pedal is depressed. This is very much like a triggering mechanism. Essentially, if you push the pedal down, that's the causing relationship. That's the thing that makes the next thing occur. And what occurs, that's the consequent. That's the consequence of the triggering. You would get the car accelerates. So if you depress the pedal, then the consequence is the car accelerates. Now note, there are multiple ways of writing an implication. Specifically, here are some different wordings of the implication from the last example. If the pedal is depressed, then the car accelerates. So if this condition, then this consequent must occur. So this is what the situation that most people are familiar with. If this cause, then this effect. On the other hand, here's an equivalent statement that, again, it's the same statement, but reworded, and it does crop up in literature this way. The pedal is depressed only if the car accelerates. Now, I find that this particular wording is a bit confusing for some folks because of the placement of the if. In the previous statement, if the pedal is depressed, then the car accelerates, the if is with the hypothesis. In fact, actually, that's how we stated it in the definition on the last slide. However, here the if is placed with the consequent instead, and thus people tend to confuse where the antecedent and the consequent are in this particular wording. Now, compare that with the final rewording of this, which is, the car accelerates if the pedal is depressed, which is the statement that I had in the first example earlier on. Okay? The car accelerates if the pedal is depressed. The if is still with the hypothesis here, and consequently, it's just a reshuffling of the phrases in the first version of this. I'm not a big fan of the middle one, the one with only if sitting there, although it does crop up in the literature. So be aware of that particular case and watch out for it. I tend to prefer the first statement a lot more, and if possible, I do use the third statement. I tend not to use the middle one. The last connective we're going to discuss is the biconditional or equivalence. The biconditional uses the words if and only if to obtain a single sentence from two separate sentences. And again, you've probably seen the words if and only if used around all through here and in a definitional context. And what's going on here is not too dissimilar from that. Each of the two sentences in the equivalence is a member of that equivalence, and the equivalence of two sentences is true if its members are either both true or both false. Long story short, an equivalence is true if the members match, if they're both true or both false. That is, if they're equal to each other, hence why it's called an equivalence. So, for instance, the ground shakes if and only if tectonic plates shift. The ground shakes is the first statement. Tectonic plates shift is the second statement, and the if and only if is equating the two of them together, like an equal sign, basically. So the equivalence is true if they're both true, or if they're both false. If one is true and the other's false, the equivalence ends up being false if they're mismatched. So you want to have equivalence stated when the two of them match together. So that's where we're going to end for today. Next time we're going to pick up by introducing symbols to the mix. How do we essentially write all this in much more concise symbology? Below we have all the references for this particular video. We have Magnus's For All X. We have Simmelmayer and Bolander's New Webster's Grammar Guide. We have Suppes and Hill's First Course in Mathematical Logic. And we also have Suppes's book in An Introduction to Logic as well. So if you like the video, please hit like. If you want, please leave a comment below or ask a question below, and we'd be happy to answer your questions as we go. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time. See you then.